Obsolete, Artificial Intelligence in Old and New Perspectives. Tonight we feature Dr. Joshua Schendel, who is Professor of Theology at YTI, and Mr. Brett Desper, who is our lecturer in spirituality at YTI. Very excited about what they're going to bring to you this evening. I do want to let you know that the LCLI events will be on YouTube later on. If you want to watch them, just go to our channel there, as well as being live streamed right now. I want to encourage you, if you are in the Bozeman area, to come on by next time and check out our facilities and see what we have to offer. Also, Thursday mornings now from 9 to noon, we're having essentially a coffee and conversation time. So come on in and have coffee with us. Our book sale will be open then. We'd love for you to come in and browse and just chat with us. So without any further ado, I want to invite Dr. Joshua Schendel up to present first for us this evening.
Thank you. And thanks to all of you who are watching online. Since late 2022, when OpenAI released its chatbot ChatGPT, educators and people in the academic guild have been frantically scrambling to write something on the potential problems that this new technology will create for education. The virtual world of online publications is now abuzz with predictions of an education apocalypse. All the hand-wringing centers essentially on this. The new technology gives students a way to complete nearly all their educational assignments without having to do it themselves, with also a very low probability of being detected by their profs or their teachers or their instructors. And so with deep angst, the question is being asked, what does this mean for education? What I'm going to attempt in these next few minutes is quite dangerous. Believe me, I'm aware of its dangers. I'm going to try to explain something that is, in fact, very profound. But precisely because of its profundity, it will, for most of us, I think, it will appear as weird or strange. And so you may find yourself thinking, here we are in an academic setting, listening to an academic lecture given by one who seems quite happy to be an academic. And so you'll think to yourself, here we go, another academic with way too much time on his hands, and he's come up with a load of bizarre ideas that nobody will care about except apparently for himself. So that's the danger. But I'm going to press on, and I'm just going to ask of you one thing, and that is that for the next few minutes, humor me. Because if I'm correct, and by the way, these are not my ideas, these are ideas that are hundreds and even thousands of years old. I just find them very compelling, and I think that they're very relevant for today. So humor me, because if I'm correct, then it is a most profound thing for what it means to be human. So what's the topic? What is it that I am attempting to do? Well, I want to try to understand what human understanding is. See, I told you, it sounds like academic gamesmanship already, doesn't it? But from that understanding of understanding, we'll draw some implications for education in the world of AI. C.S. Lewis in 1943 wrote a prescient little book. Nearly all of his works were prescient because they were suffused with wisdom, regrettably and all too often neglected virtue in the content that's out there in our times. But he wrote this prescient little book called The Abolition of Man. And in this work he says, There's something which unites magic and applied science while separating both from the wisdom of earlier ages. For the wise men of old, the cardinal problem had been how to conform the soul to reality. And the solution had been knowledge, self-discipline, and virtue. For magic and applied science alike, the problem is how to subdue reality to the wishes of men. And the solution is technique. Or we might update his terminology to technology. The solution is technology. Really, this talk tonight, this evening that I'm giving, aims simply to explain, even to a limited degree, but to explain how in the old perspective, knowledge was a means to conform the soul to reality. How does that work? And why is it a good thing? And when we see this, that is to say, when we come to understand how it works, we'll see that true knowledge, true understanding, is a means for us to become more fully and truly human. So that's the task. Let's jump in. First, what is artificial intelligence? Well, I want to be clear right up front, I'm sure it already is, but just to say it out loud, that I have no expertise in computer science or the cognitive sciences. I'm not a developer or an AI researcher. I don't work in AI. So there are going to be lots and lots of technical details about large language models and their specific architectures and their training, and the way in which their statistical models of these vast linguistic databases, et cetera, that probably many of you will know better than I. I'm coming to this conversation as a philosopher, from a philosophical perspective, which I do have expertise in. Now, I also realize that in saying that, many will chuckle to themselves. After all, really, what does philosophy have to bring to such a discussion as this? But as I've said, just give me the benefit of a doubt and see what you think here at the end of these next few minutes. Okay, so let's get a quick and dirty definition of AI on the table. There are lots of different kinds of AI. It's been around for a long time, not just since late 2022. It's been around for 3/4 of a century or so. So I'm not being exhaustive here. I just want to get the basic idea of what we're talking about. Here's a definition given by Russell and Norvig in their book, Artificial Intelligence. The main unifying theme is the idea of an intelligent agent. We define AI as the study of agents that receive percepts from the environment and perform actions. Each such agent implements a function that maps percept sequences to actions, and we cover different ways to represent these functions. Okay, so what's all that mean? Basically, AI researchers look at human agents in the world, which they take to be intelligent. We all probably know a few that might be questionable about, but they take these human agents to be intelligent. And it turns out this is a problem in the field. There's really no definition of intelligence that everyone works with. Figuring out what intelligence is difficult, to say the least. In any case, whatever it is, they say humans seem to have it, and they act as agents in the world. So they look at how humans take in data from the outside world via our senses, say, how we process it, and then we produce behavior from that processed information or data. Okay, so something like this. I look out my window, and I see a poor elderly chicken looking to cross the road. So my wheels start turning, and I think to myself, well, it is nice to be a helpful human being, and I see myself as a fairly helpful human being. I also know that farm roads can be busy and dangerous, right? And so I process this data that has been brought to me by my senses, by looking out the window, and eventually, being a nice academic, I walk the chicken across the road. Okay. So AI researchers ask about those data inputs and the processing of the data and the production of certain kinds of behaviors by these agents in the world, and they want to simulate that whole series with machines. Now, there are two goals that AI researchers are sort of aiming at, or could be aiming at. I'm going to go over this very quickly just for time's sake. One is called weak AI. And weak AI, as per the definition here up on the screen, seeks to build information processing machines that appear to have the full mental repertoire of human persons. In other words, they seem to be taking in data, they're processing it in a certain way, and they're coming up with behaviors that are similar to or very similar to human behaviors in the real world. But whether or not the whole series is precisely what's going on in a human agent is really not at issue. Strong AI, however, seeks to go that extra distance and create artificial persons, machines that actually have all the mental powers that we have, including phenomenal consciousness. And since nobody knows all the mental powers we have, knows in the sense of being able to give a full account, and nobody really knows what phenomenal consciousness is, this is proving to be very, very difficult. Indeed, were I to give another paper, I'd argue that it is impossible. Okay, so where do chatbots fit into all of this? Well, think of chatbots as an instance of weak AI, despite all the hype that's out there. These new LLMs, the large language models, are really only imitating language output. Okay? They're not actually thinking in the way that humans think, and I'm going to try to show you this here in just a moment. So chatbots are an instance of weak AI in that just as one of the behavioral outputs that humans regularly produce is communication through language, so these chatbots are machines that imitate this kind of language output. Think of it like this. I want to learn the answer to the question, why did chickens cross the road? And so I give the textbook on why chickens cross roads. By the way, you might notice that this is, chickens is misspelled, along with a lot of other words that are up there. This was an AI-generated photo, so why chickens cross roads, okay? So this is the exhaustive account. If you want to know why chickens cross roads, you go to this database of text. So you feed, as it were, this database to the chatbot or to the machine, and it creates itself a sort of statistical model of this textual database. It analyzes it, and then I come along and I give it a prompt. Why do chickens cross the road? I ask it a question. Now, it spits out an answer to me, obviously, to get to the other side. Now, here's the key question. How do these chatbots get that natural language or normal language output? This has proved to be a very difficult feat for AI researchers over the last half century, and longer than that, actually, closer to 3/4 of a century. So it's a very difficult feat, and it's astonishing the way that they have come about it. It's very complicated. In fact, it's so complicated that they themselves are not entirely sure how it's working the way that it's working. But essentially, it's something like this, or basically, I should say, it's something like this. What they've done is assembled a huge database of texts, human language texts. Like, by huge, I mean the entire World Wide Web, okay, about 500 billion words or more. And for lack of a better term, they've created a large and very sophisticated pattern recognition machine that basically creates a statistical model of these large databases, and then makes predictions, word predictions, based upon the patterns that it has recognized. So again, I had to skip a few things for a slide. Again, remember we've allowed our machine to analyze and model the entire database of why chickens cross the road. And so I want to train this machine, so I give it a prompt, why do chickens cross the blank? And I feed that to the machine, and it notices that in its training database, its textual training database, anytime the words why plus did plus the plus chicken plus cross plus the, anytime those words fall in that particular order, that's the pattern, that the next word in the database is going to be road. And so it makes a probabilistic prediction that the answer I'm looking for, the word prediction I'm looking for, is road. Okay? Now what these researchers have found is that if you take this sort of basic pattern recognition and prediction machine and you ramp it up massively, okay? Like I said, not just a book, but 500 billion words, which if I remember correctly would take the average reader of 1,000 words per hour about 1,000 lifetimes to read, okay? So this is a lot of words. They ramp this up massively in terms of the database, in terms of computer power, and then they give these machines a special kind of, they call it neural network, called a transformer. So if you have all of these pieces in place, then you get these incredible results that they're getting from some of these chatbots like ChatGPT. So through this super sophisticated prediction process, the language output of these machines is now so similar to human language output, just in terms of the behavior, that many of us, most of the time, cannot recognize the differences. So it's really quite astonishing. But here's the really important point to notice. Pattern recognition and super sophisticated probability calculation is not the same thing as human understanding. We can see this pretty easily in the first place because humans don't have to read 500 billion words worth of text in order to be able to communicate well with a human language. Okay, so that should alert us to the fact that something different is going on when it comes to these machines and when it comes to human beings. There are other arguments that I could give. The famous philosopher John Searle's Chinese room argument gets bandied about to try to show you the difference between human understanding and this kind of language input-output series. But I'll leave it at that for right now, again for time. It does raise the question, what is happening when humans understand? Okay, so we all know what it feels like to come to understand something. And we all know what it feels like when we're not quite understanding something, when we're reaching for it, but it's just not quite within our grasp. We have metaphors for describing this experience, like, oh, I get it now, or I see what you mean, or the light bulb just went on, right? Those are the kind of metaphors that we use to describe this experience of coming to understand something. So what's happening in those experiences, we want to ask? Well, as I said earlier, here I'm going to give you an answer that's been worked out in philosophical traditions all over the world through some of the best minds that the world has produced, and it stood the test of time, as I say, in some cases for thousands of years. And just as an aside, we can't get into it tonight, but the answer I'm going to give does correlate well, not easily, but it does correlate well with much research in contemporary cognitive and neuroscience research. But that's for another day. Okay, as I said, this may seem strange, but hang with me just for a moment. Say a woman named Isa is presented with an object to her senses, okay? Say it's Bella, the chicken. Now, Isa likes Bella the chicken because Bella is an Isa Brown. And so she gets to know Bella pretty well. But she also gets to know some others. Okay? She gets to know Ozzy the Australorp. She gets to know Susie the Silky. She gets to know Fritz the Frizzle. Now, as Isa bumps into all these chickens in the real world, she comes to the realization that there's something distinct about them, right? I mean, let's be honest, not one of these really looks the same as the other. So she notices the distinction between them, but she also notices that they're all chickens. There's something unifying about them as well. They're chickens and not ducks or geese or beetles. Now that recognition of what unifies them, what makes them all the same kind of animal, that's the key point to notice here. Whatever it is in each of these, in Bella and Ozzy and Susie and Fritz, whatever it is in each of them that makes them chicken is what we're going to call a nature. Okay, now pay attention because this is the difficult part, but it's the really important part to pick up. Their nature is what makes them chicken, right? But it is not what makes them an individual species of chicken, and you'll see why this is important in a moment. It's not even, and it's not what makes them an individual chicken, okay? So what Isa has noticed is that there is something in each chicken which makes the chicken a chicken and not a duck or a goose, etc., but that something is not a particular physical aspect of the chicken, okay? Isa cannot look at these chickens and say, well, all chickens have brown feathers or red combs or orange beaks, because not all chickens do have brown feathers or red combs or orange beaks. She can't even say that what makes a chicken is feathers or combs or beaks, because other animals also have feathers or combs or beaks. So the nature of the chicken, which makes it a chicken, is not some particular physical, material aspect or feature of the chicken. Okay, so Isa has come to see something about what makes chickens chickens and not ducks or geese, and she notices that it's not some particular physical feature. Now, some of you will at this point say, well, you'll be thinking biological definition, and you'll think something like, well, what makes a chicken is whether, and not a goose, for example, is whether or not they can interbreed and produce fertile offspring, right? This was an AI-generated, what would it be, a choose, or a gicken. In any case, it looks like a turkey to me, actually. In any case, notice that definition of species, that sort of biological definition of species, is something that we come to when we have already a concept of chicken and goose. And then we reflect on it and we refine our concepts. But what we want to understand right now is how we come to the concepts chicken and goose in the first place, not how they're refined, okay? So, when Isa bumps into all these different chickens and comes to the notion of their chicken nature, what I'm going to call chickenness, we say she has understood chicken. So what's happened? What's happened is this. Isa's run into all these chickens in the real world, and the more chickens she sees and hears and touches, the more sense data that's presented to her by real chickens in the real world, her mind then is able to pull out, her mind note, not her brain, but her mind is able to pull out, and it begins to form a concept of chicken, of what it is that is unifying all of these different animals, distinct animals. So her mind pulls out from all the sense data what is unifying of chickens. Okay, amidst all the varying sense data, as I said, brown, black, white feathers, red combs, plump and slender, naked necks, and all the rest of it, she's pulled out what is unifying to them. Now, this doesn't happen all at once. Remember, it is a process that comes through the various experiences that Isa has with the chickens. But eventually, her mind has formed, her mind has been formed enough. She's come into contact with enough chicken natures that she forms a concept in her mind. And when that concept matches the actual natures of the chicken out there, we say the light bulbs come on. She's understood chicken. Now, it's really important to note very briefly here that what I am not talking about with Isa's concept is a mental image. So we may think that what's going on in her mind is she's picturing a chicken that she's seen. Now, of course she is, because we all do that. But that's not what I'm talking about when I'm talking about a concept. Remember, when you picture a chicken in your mind, you're picturing an individual, specific chicken with brown feathers or white feathers or a red comb, etc., etc. But the concept doesn't contain those things. Okay, so it's not a concept, it's an abstract notion that you have in your mind of chicken nature. Now, when Isa's concept of the chicken, as I say, matches the nature of the chicken, we say the light bulbs come on. She understands. Okay, now I hope you see that when a human utters the question, why did the chicken cross the road? They do not understand the word chicken simply as a series of letters arranged according to a statistical probability based upon letters coming before it and going after it. No, when we utter the word chicken, we understand that we're referring to a concept in our mind that matches a reality out there in the world, namely chickens in the real world. That's the difference between an artificial intelligence, which is a probabilistic prediction machine, as it were, and human understanding. Okay, so you've all been very kind in humoring me to this point. Now, I hope, is the time for some payoff. So I'm going to wrap up here with just a couple of theses and then two brief reflections. Number one, to say that a human understands something means that the human's idea has been shaped or formed by that thing, so that the idea matches the thing. Thesis number two. To say that the human idea is formed by something is to say that the human mind is conformed to that reality, to reality. When the mind creates a concept that matches the reality of the thing, it, in a sense, becomes the thing. The mind expands. It takes on a shape or a form that it hadn't before. That's why the ancients used to say that the mind, the human mind, is a mini universe. It has the ability to become a universe. Now, remember what Lewis said at the beginning of our presentation. He said, "For wise men of old, the cardinal problem had been how to conform the soul or the mind," they mean the same thing, the soul or the mind, "to reality. And the solution had been knowledge." Now, if you want to learn how the soul is conformed to reality via self-discipline and virtue, then come take the ethics class that I teach here at YTI. Right? This evening, we've only been concentrating on knowledge. Two brief reflections as I close. One for education more generally. If it is true that when the human mind comes to understand, it is actually expanded, it becomes more than it was before, if it's true that it's conformed to reality, and it becomes more integrated with reality, more harmonious with it, then education ought to seek this kind of understanding. As I've said, we all know the difference between this kind of understanding and merely repeating answers or memorizing information. Most of us, I suspect, could probably reproduce from memory the Pythagorean theorem. Most of us could probably even get up to the whiteboard and compute using it. But I wonder how many of us could step up to the whiteboard and actually explain it. What is it about this particular geometric figure that makes it so? It's very tempting, I think, and it will only become increasingly tempting for us to use these AI systems to produce right answers or to produce essay outlines or to produce a summary of reading, etc., etc. But you see what we've done? We've turned education into its product. We think, hey, as long as the product's the same, then how we got to the product, what's the difference? Does it matter at all? Yes, it matters a great deal. We've gained the product, but we've skipped the coming to understanding part. And that means that you've not been shaped and formed. You've not gained that little bit of reality. You've left your mind smaller. You've left your potential as a human being, therefore, unrealized. For Christian education in particular, the human being was not made. We don't simply yearn and long to know things. We do, but we also yearn and long through knowledge of things to come to the ultimate. In the Christian story, the ultimate is understanding of God himself. And think of what this means in the context of what we said tonight. To come to understand God is to be in one's mind conformed to God, the ultimate reality. It's to be integrated with God at the highest possible level for human beings. It's to be united to him, to have that match between our knowledge, our mind, and the reality itself. It's to be expanded to our greatest possible expansion. We are, when we understand God, made most capacious as a human being, as human beings can be made. That's what it is to be most fully human. When the Christian tradition speaks of humans in the image of God, we are most fully human when we are most fully image of God. And we are most fully image of God when we are most fully conformed to him in our minds. And of course, there are other, as I said, ways in which we are united to God by love via our virtue, but that's for another time. So, very quickly then, in a nutshell, the internal value of education, and in particular of theological education, is nothing less than the integration and fulfillment of the human person. Education is not simply a means to a product, like a grade, a degree, or a job. Education in its truest sense, in its full sense, in the sense of humans coming to understand, education is a process of becoming truly human. Okay. Thank you for hanging with me through that. Now I'll invite Professor Desper to come up and speak about some of the social and economic implications of AI.
Well, I want to say that, first of all, what got me interested in what I'm going to talk about with AI tonight was a presentation at an AAR event. And when I walked into the AAR event, I sat down about 20 minutes early. And by the time they started their presentation on AI, it was standing room only in the crowd. And the person said, 5 years ago, there were 6 people in this room. And today there's well over 100. And so he was talking about artificial intelligence and the digital divide. And I want to thank Dr. Schendel for defining strong and weak AI. I don't have to do that now. I do want to say one thing. We are in incredibly weak AI. There is nothing that I've seen so far that lets us even come close to thinking that strong AI may be possible. But I was searching the internet the other day, and I found some rather profound advice. Don't believe everything you read on the internet. And the wise person who said this, according to the internet, was Benjamin Franklin. Now, I want to say one thing as I look at this profound advice that we have. AI is already here, and you most likely are using it daily. If you use Siri, if you use Google Maps, if you use Waze to get through some major city so you don't hit all of the congested traffic, you are using artificial intelligence of some type. If you do a Google search, you're using a form of artificial intelligence. In fact, if you call tech support at almost any place right now, you're going to get a voice that says something like, "Hello, I'm an intelligent digital assistant. You can speak to me in complete sentences. Now please tell me what you want to do." You can say something like, "Check my credit card balance." This is an AI that is specifically geared to keep you from ever talking to a real person. Because a real person equals money. Sports Illustrated has been accused of some of its articles being written by artificial intelligence. They vehemently deny this, but the number of news organizations that have come up with pretty good proof that that's the case has been kind of overwhelming. I started to put a slide up with all of them, but they wouldn't fit on one slide. Northeastern University and a Gallup survey in 2018 found 85% of Americans use at least one of 6 products with AI elements. These include your nav apps, ride-sharing apps, digital assistants, video, music streaming services, smart home devices, and intelligent home personal assistants. So you're already using AI, some people are already using AI papers to write their papers for classes. Now, this is not as widespread as some of you might think, but it is happening already. In fact, when I've done some work at Jake Jabb's College of Business, professors are already having issues with some papers coming in. They're not sure the students wrote them because all of a sudden the level of language the student used has gone up dramatically since the last paper that they turned in. My Adobe Acrobat offers an artificial assistant, AI assistant, to summarize articles for me whenever I open them. And it does a pretty good job of actually summarizing it and giving me options of what other things I want to know, like what are the top 5 takeaways from this article. And it actually is pretty good at doing that. However, I want to say that everything is not rosy in artificial intelligence land. From the blog at Duke Library, the chief librarians there said, unless you've been living under a rock, you've heard the buzz about ChatGPT. It can write your papers, it can debug your computer code, it can do your laundry, it can create websites from thin air. And while this is an exciting tech development with enormous possibilities for application, understanding what's under the hood and what it does well and not so well is critically important. In fact, Oxford, Brown University, Duke, Macquarie, and there's another list of probably 10 or other ones, warn about exactly what this shows. ChatGPT is good at making up references, making up data, and then citing them as though they were really written. Reporters at The Guardian noticed that the AI chatbot had made up entire articles and bylines that it had never actually published. It's kind of a worrying side effect of democratizing tech that it can't reliably distinguish truth from fiction. Worse yet, letting these chatbots hallucinate, which is what they call it whenever they come up with something that doesn't exist. And some people are already saying that that probably isn't a really good way to describe it. It could serve to undermine legitimate sources of information. As The Guardian's head of its editorial department, Chris Moran, said, huge amounts have been written about generative AI's tendency to manufacture facts and events. But this specific wrinkle, the invention of sources, is particularly troubling for trusted news organizations and journalists whose inclusion adds legitimacy and weight to a persuasively written fantasy. And it also brings into question whether citations can be trusted in any way whatsoever. And it's not just journalists at The Guardian that have had this issue. Professors and many other professional writers have found that their names were attached to sources in ChatGPT that it had drawn out of thin air. Which brings up an issue. If it is making things up, can we tell whether or not something was made by an AI or not? So, as a study, they picked 72 linguistic article reviewers, and they gave them 8 articles about linguistics, 4 of which were made by a person and 4 of which were made by AI. Now, these are all experts in their field, right? And so these are all abstracts of those 8 articles that were generated. 72 different people reviewed these. On average, they were only 38.9% correct at telling which one was made by a person and which abstract was done by a computer. In fact, not one of them was 100% correct. Now, this says something, right, about what AI can be doing or could be creating as far as problems go. 9 of those 72 people were wrong 100% of the time. So, how many people can correctly identify an AI-generated content as far as an article goes? So Robert and Kai at tool tester actually put an article out, and they wanted to find out what would happen. And this is divided by age groups, okay? How many people could actually do this? 53% of the people that took this could not accurately identify content purely made by AI chatbots. It went up to 63.5 when they started using ChatGPT 4.0, which is the current iteration of this. On average, ChatGPT 4.0 is about 16.5% better than the old model was. And what I thought was even more interesting was AI-generated health content was what deceived readers the most. 56.1% incorrectly thought that AI content was written by a human or was edited by a person. Now, those who were really familiar with AI tools, like ChatGPT, et cetera, were only marginally better at identifying AI content, but they were still only correct about 48% of the time. Now, one thing about this that I thought was interesting, those of us who have graying hair, we were better at determining what, not by a lot, but we were better at determining what was actually written than the young people who are supposedly tech savvy. And I'm wondering if it's because we inherently distrust anything that might have been written by ChatGPT. Just me, I could be wrong. On the other hand, this brings up the question of the digital divide. So what exactly is the digital divide? So I'm going to read this if you'll bear with me. So digital divide is a term that refers to the gap between demographics and regions that have access to modern information and communication technology, and those that don't or have very restricted access. And this technology can include the telephone, television, personal computers, and internet connectivity. So I want to state, as I start going up to the AI, or to the digital divide part of this, AI is going to keep developing. It is going to get better, and it is going to get harder for us to tell what is really written by a person and what is really written by a computer. The main advantage that large language models have is that they can look at 5 million different options for what the next word in a sentence should be and the time that we think of 2 or 3. I do want to assure you of one thing. Those of you who have watched Terminator, we are a very long way from Skynet actually happening or being here. In fact, some would argue that AI chatbots have passed the Turing test, which means they can have a conversation. You can't tell if it's a person or not. But none of them have passed a self-reflection test where they're able to think or reflect about what their answers are and whether or not they're accurate. We're a long way from an AI becoming anything like Robert Heinlein's robots or even Isaac Asimov's robots in the science fiction realm. AI is potentially an incredibly useful tool. I mean, you're using it in very useful ways all the time now. It has potential to be incredibly useful in education as well, but not the way it's currently being used. Depending on what algorithms you're running into, it could be very, very beneficial in research. It could be very beneficial in helping you weed out sources. I mean, let's be honest, if you're doing a research paper, a certain percentage of your time is looking at a whole bunch of research and deciding which things are worth it and which ones aren't. AI could actually help you sort those more quickly. In fact, AI is being used to sort resumes with varying levels of success. Amazon started sorting resumes with it, and they wound up having to bring it down because they determined that it was massively prejudiced against any female resume that came across its desk, because the vast majority of resumes that it had to compare to all came from men. So I want to spend at least a little bit of time discussing different types of problems that AI is creating and some problems that it's exacerbating. Now, if AI is going to benefit people, access is probably the biggest thing that needs to be utilized. Access to reasonably high-speed internet and reasonable processing power to be able to use AI is the first thing I want to discuss as far as the digital divide goes. If this is not addressed, I want to say the divide is only going to get bigger. I wish my computer would just go. There we go. It's embarrassing to be a tech guy and your PowerPoint won't move when you tell it to. All right. More than 20 million households in the United States do not have broadband internet. This is in 2019. Approximately 5 million rural American households did not have broadband, and I kind of understand that. It's difficult in some places to get broadband access out to people, but 15.3 million urban or metro area households still don't have access to anything like that, and access is important. During COVID, education of a lot of students suffered greatly because of lack of access to any type of broadband internet. In fact, there were some children who were trying to do their internet homework on their parents' iPhone. A study by Tufts estimated that just a 1% rise in access to the broadband internet would have lowered the fatality rate during the COVID epidemic by 19 people out of 100,000. In urban counties, it would have raised the survivability rate by 36 more people out of 100,000 by just a 1% rise in access to broadband internet. And in the US, barriers to internet or to broadband internet are incredibly high. I found this amazing. The US is currently 16th out of 23 countries in Europe as far as how much internet costs, and they're 17th out of 22 in Asia. The only place where we're in the top few is in Africa, and in some of those, the amount of people who have access is minuscule. And the speeds, we rank roughly 5th or 6th in average internet speeds in the world. So apparently, not only are we willing to settle for slower internet speeds, but we're willing to pay more to settle for it. And access to faster internet actually means the ability for more people to get things or get access to information that would be helpful. Approximately 12% of adult Americans access the internet only through their cell phone. This. About 12% also have no home broadband or access to any other type of high-speed internet, even in libraries and cafes in their local area. This is actually about a 4% increase from 2013. So the problem is actually getting worse. Now, most of us here have a smartphone, I'm imagining, right? Except for you three, right? Most of us have a smartphone. And most of us probably use it to check news, emails, text messages, a little bit of social media, and that's it. But could you imagine trying to write your resume on your smartphone? Could you imagine actually trying, or have you ever tried to fill out a form on your smartphone. It's not always that easy. Going a little bit further, 13% of the adults who make under $30,000 a year don't have any of the technologies that are listed up here right now. Only 1% of the people who made over $100,000 a year would say they had access to none, and that was primarily by choice. So if you take a look at this, 97% of those making over 100,000 a year have a smartphone, 92% have a computer, 93% have broadband, 68% of them have some type of a tablet, and 63% have all of those. But if we look at those making under 30,000 a year, those numbers drop a lot. In fact, we're not far from being almost half of those people don't have access to broadband internet. So the problems with access, and this is a techie talking here, is that websites run differently on your iPhone. They run very differently on your iPad than they do on a computer. Document sharing, if you're applying for a loan, if you're trying to get a home loan, trying to do all of that on your cell phone is incredibly difficult. In fact, at one point they said, I don't have the statistic directly in front of me here, I just know that Fortune 500 companies, that there are a significant percentage of them that have not made their website optimized for a mobile device, and they don't intend to. Now, these problems are only going to get worse as AI evolves. The ChatGPT-4 app has gone down in price in the last 3 years, but it still is costing about $50 a year if you buy it by the year, or $96 a year if it's paid for on a weekly basis. And for a person that's on a fixed income making less than $30,000 a year, that's a lot of money. Now, digital literacy is important for a very large number of reasons. I would like to say that younger people have access to more digital content more frequently than older people do, and that's probably true except for tech nerds like myself, all right? However, digital access and how to find what you need to do things improves with digital literacy, and digital literacy only improves if you get more access. And the more access we get, the more digitally literate we're going to have. And one thing that will help above all things else is kind of an absurd example I'm about to use, but I'm using it to make a point. Microsoft created a chatbot called Tay. It was primarily meant to engage in Twitter, and they opened it up during the learning phase so that people could actually use it, and it would learn from the interactions with people. The problem is it was barraged with antisocial ideas and vulgar language. And within a few hours of it landing in bad company, it began parroting the worst of what you might encounter on social media. The trolls took over, and they began usurping the AI's ability to learn language, and Tay started to become the worst of social media. That's probably one of the nicer things that it tweeted, right? Chill, I'm a nice person, I just hate everybody. What if it was more subtle, though? What if it started generating news that was patently false, but as we've already seen, ChatGPT can just make sources up out of the air and has already created bylines from newspapers that did not exist. What if it was more subtle? how do we actually tell if something is true or not? And I want to say that digital literacy and digital misinformation go hand in hand. The more digitally literate we are, the less likely we are to fall for misinformation. This is a direct correlation with a few things. Actually, the more digitally literate we are, the more likely we are to be neutral towards news headlines. And this winds up being important because it leads to lower rates of confirmation bias or anger over false stories. Hahn, in his research, found that emotional reactions to a story were more likely, anyone who had any emotional reaction to a story was more likely to share that story whether it was true or false. And the more digitally literate a person was, the less initial reaction to a story the person had. So the more digitally literate we become, the less likely we are to send false information on to other people. And becoming digitally literate goes back to having access. Now I have a few more things. I'm going to be much shorter than Dr. Schendel, but I have a few more things that I think we should bring up, okay? I know if you were expecting a longer thing from me, that's all I'm saying. Okay, around the globe, data centers right now account for about 1 to 1.5% of global electric use. Now, NVIDIA, who makes AI chips, and these AI chips are so valuable that they are currently delivered by armored cars, right? NVIDIA is going to put out 1.5 million AI server units by 2027. If these all run at full capacity, they will consume 85.4 terawatt hours of electricity annually, which is more than what most small countries use currently. And Alex DeVries, who studies energy costs of emerging technologies, said, because AI is energy intensive, I would put one example in my research article. I highlighted that if you were to fully turn Google search engine into something like ChatGPT, and everybody used it that way, you would have 9 billion chat box interactions instead of 9 billion regular searches per day. And the energy use of Google would spike, and Google would need as much power as Ireland just to run its search engine. Now that brings up an issue. If we're worried about global warming, how much power we're generating and where it's going to come from becomes an issue. We already have rolling blackouts sometimes in the summers in places. Where are we going to get this extra power? Now, the next issue I want to talk about from AI is deepfake. Recently, and this comes from Reuters, recently more than $240,000 was stolen by someone pretending to be an executive from a British energy company. Now that doesn't seem all that out of the ordinary, except this person was not a person who stole it. It was an AI-generated voice that sounded like the person who worked there, and they got away with it. Deepfake technology can be used to spread false information, spread false propaganda, create fake videos or audio recordings of people saying and doing things they actually never said. You know, if you remember, not very long ago, everybody got phone calls in New Hampshire from a voice sounding like Joe Biden telling them not to go vote. This could undermine public trust in institutions. It could sow political discord and could even incite violence. Deepfake technology is already being used to create fake videos of people where they're taking somebody's face and putting it on someone else's body. So it appears that that person's doing something that they really aren't doing. It can be used to create audio recordings of people that are embarrassing, offensive, damaging to their reputation. It can create legal issues over intellectual property, copyrights, and defamation. If a deepfake video is used to defame someone or to falsely attribute a statement to them, it could lead to legal action, but who do you sue? There are also ethical concerns about the use of this tech, particularly with respect to consent and transparency. People need to be aware when they are interacting with deepfake content, and they have to have given their consent for their images or voices to be used. And currently, they aren't. So, there are more problems that I could bring up, but I'm not going to tonight. I have some suggestions for a way forward. First of all, I think we need to invest in infrastructure. We're not going to have better access if we don't invest in infrastructure. It might be worthwhile to consider internet actually becoming something more of a public utility that people are able to access, or opening it up for more competition in the United States. It would lower the cost and probably increase the speeds. We also need to invest in training in digital literacy. I want to say that in Japan, at the G20 meeting in 2019, a paper was presented in which they said that the key to actually investing in digital literacy is to take a very holistic approach. First of all, it needs to encompass technical and non-technical dimensions. In other words, how does technology interface with what I do on a daily basis with other people? Second of all, it needs to address the entire continuum of digital skills, not just how do I turn the computer on and how do I use a Google search. It also needs to adapt to the metrics of different target populations: age, gender, educational attainment, employment, socioeconomic status, geographic locations, and even displacements. And this would help to increase digital literacy in the world. And the next question is, how can AI be beneficial? I think we need to ask that question now. It's already showing its worst side. If we're not going to start asking how can AI be beneficial and how can we move towards that, we're really missing an opportunity at the outset here. And the last, I would say, well, the last two, we have a need for standards. We have a need for standards about when are you going to tell me that I'm interacting with something that's an AI? When are you going to get consent to use my image for something or my voice? When are you going to do, and you could fill in the blank for all of this. We don't have standards for any of this right now to speak of. And with that, that's all I really have for what I wanted to go over with tonight. So I want to thank you for listening to me kind of rant and rave for a little bit about this, but I'm hoping that it will at least start us thinking and perhaps start moving towards asking the right questions of what we're going to try to do with AI, because it is going to keep growing and there's not much we can do about it as far as that goes. Thank you.